The war that began in late February 2026, with Iran on one side and Israel and the United States on the other, may have been a shock to many, but it did not appear suddenly. It has grown out of many years of tension, mistrust, and conflict in the Middle East. Relations between Iran and Israel have been hostile for decades, and the United States has long been involved in the region as both a military and political power, and by the mid-2020s, these tensions had reached a point where many observers believed that a larger war was becoming increasingly possible. One of the central issues behind the growing conflict was Iran's nuclear program. Iran stated that its nuclear activities were intended for civilian use, such as energy and scientific research. However, Israel and several Western governments had argued that the program could allow Iran to build nuclear weapons. Israel in particular viewed the possibility of a nuclear-armed Iran as a direct threat to their security, and have repeatedly stated that they would not allow Iran to develop such weapons. Diplomatic attempts to resolve this dispute had taken place for years, and agreements had been made and later abandoned, with negotiations often breaking down over sanctions, regional security issues, and verification of the rules. At the same time, the conflict between Iran and Israel increasingly took place through indirect means, rather than open warfare. This had included cyber attacks, intelligence operations, and strikes against facilities connected to Iran's nuclear and military programs. The rivalry had also played out through allied groups in other countries. Iran had built strong ties with several armed organizations in the Middle East, including Hezbollah in Lebanon and a number of militias in Iraq and Syria. These groups were often described by Iran as partners in a regional alliance, while Israel and the United States viewed them as Iranian proxies that expanded Tehran's influence across the region. For some time, Israel had been conducting military operations against Iranian-linked targets in Syria and other locations, and there have been exchanges of rocket fire and drone attacks between Israel and groups associated with Iran, with both sides accusing each other of preparing for a larger confrontation. Within Iran, the government has been facing economic pressures, exacerbated by international sanctions. These sanctions were implemented by several countries due to Iran's nuclear program and its activities in the region. As a result, the Iranian economy has struggled, leading to periods of protest and political tension within the country. By the beginning of 2026, the Middle East was already in a fragile and unstable security situation. Military forces in the region were on high alert, and governments around the world were closely monitoring the standoff between Iran, Israel, and the United States. So perhaps the events that came next were indeed inevitable. Welcome to Wars of the World. On February 28th, following President Trump's directive, the United States and Israel launched coordinated attacks on various sites in Iran. This campaign was referred to as Operation Roaring Lion by Israel and Operation Epic Fury by the United States. The airstrikes commenced on a Saturday at approximately 9:45 a.m., which is considered the first day of the work week in Iran. The key objectives were to target Iranian missile bases, military command centers, government buildings, and nuclear-related infrastructure. The targets included Tehran, Isfahan, Qom, Kermanshah, and Karaj. This operation utilized US missiles, drones, and Israeli fighter jets, and also, notably, low-cost one-way attack drones that were being employed in combat for the first time. One of the primary targets was the Pasture Street district in Tehran, where Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the second supreme leader of Iran, typically resided. This area is also home to the Presidential Palace and the National Security Council. Initial reports indicated that at least 7 missiles had struck the area, and American officials had confirmed that the strikes were coordinated with the US government. The Israeli Air Force also announced that it had targeted 500 military sites in western and central Iran, focusing on missile launchers and air defense systems, utilizing approximately 200 fighter jets. This operation marked the largest airstrike campaign in the history of the Israeli Air Force. In the first 24 hours alone, Israel dropped over 1,200 bombs, targeting not only strategic locations on the ground, but also Iranian naval vessels. Among the weaponry used was the newly developed Black Sparrow air-launched ballistic missile, which was deployed from F-15 jets. In addition to the airstrikes, Israel conducted coordinated cyber attacks on Iranian infrastructure, media, and mobile applications, sending messages that encouraged Iranian citizens to rise up against their government. One of the applications targeted was the popular Badi Sabah calendar prayer app, which has over 5 million downloads. The app was hacked to send push notifications in Persian, urging military personnel and citizens to defect, lay down their arms, and to join opposition forces, with messages such as "Help has arrived" and "It's time for reckoning." After the initial attacks, Israel declared a state of emergency due to concerns about potential retaliation from Iran. Sirens were activated throughout the country as the government advised citizens to stay in protected areas, while the Israeli Minister of Health relocated hospital operations underground, and Israel urged Iranian citizens living near military sites to evacuate immediately, warning, quote, "Your presence in these areas puts your life at risk." Trump also cautioned that US lives could be at risk. Later, on February 28th, it was reported that the body of the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, had been discovered, and the next day, Iranian state television confirmed his assassination, stating that he had been killed while in his office. Khamenei's wife, Mansouri Khojasteh Baghazadeh, died 2 days later from injuries sustained in the strike. After this first round of strikes were deemed a success, both President Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu released video statements announcing that Israel and the United States had launched strikes against Iran in order to, quote, "remove the existential threat." Following the US and Israeli attacks, Iran initiated a swift retaliatory campaign across the Middle East. They named their response Operation True Promise 4. Within hours of the strikes, Iranian forces launched missiles towards Israel, hitting major cities including Tel Aviv and Haifa, and over the following days, several more missile barrages were conducted as a part of a broader retaliation effort. Although Israeli air defense systems intercepted many missiles, some managed to strike at urban areas, causing death and injury to civilians. The well-coordinated offensive also targeted a range of strategically significant installations across the Persian Gulf, with particular emphasis on high-value sites in Israel and a multitude of US military bases located in Jordan, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. But the Iranian assault didn't confine itself to military objectives. It also extended to civilian infrastructure, such as airports and major shipping ports in Kuwait, the UAE, and Oman, endangering the safety and security of civilian air travel and maritime operations across this critical region. In Dubai and Abu Dhabi, panicked tourists rushed to find safety as Iranian missiles streaked ominously across the night sky. Finding refuge in hotels, shopping malls, and underground shelters, these luxurious locations were transformed into scenes of chaos. Within days, there was a notable and dangerous escalation when Iran issued an ultimatum that led to the unprecedented closure of the Strait of Hormuz, a vital maritime corridor responsible for a significant portion of the world's oil and gas shipments. This closure resulted in an immediate and widespread disruption to international energy supplies, triggering a spike in oil prices on the global market and intensifying concerns among economic stakeholders worldwide. As the crisis deepened, Hezbollah, the militant organization based in Lebanon, expressed solidarity with Iran following the assassination of Ali Khamenei. This development complicated the already unstable regional situation, introducing more actors into the unfolding conflict and raising the potential for a wider war across the Middle East. The war triggered widespread reactions from governments around the world, with most countries responding cautiously and calling for restraint. Western allies of the United States, including countries across Europe, and partners such as Canada and Australia, have generally supported the American and Israeli position that Iran's military and nuclear activities represented a serious international security threat. However, even among these supportive countries, leaders have emphasized that the conflict must not escalate into a wider regional war, and have repeatedly urged diplomatic efforts in order to stabilize the situation. UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer, who is generally regarded a close ally of the United States, initially refused US requests to use UK military bases, including Diego Garcia and RAF Fairford, for initial strikes on Iran. He stated legal advice indicating that preemptive action would likely be considered unlawful under international law. However, he later authorized limited defensive use of these bases after Iranian attacks had threatened British nationals and allies in the Middle East. This decision has faced sharp criticism from Donald Trump. Across Europe, the reaction has been more mixed and careful. Many European governments have avoided strongly siding with either side, instead focusing on the need for de-escalation and negotiations. European leaders are particularly concerned about the broader consequences of the conflict, including disruption to global energy supplies, rising oil prices, and the possibility of a humanitarian crisis or refugee movements if fighting spreads across the Middle East. As a result, European diplomacy has largely centered on attempts to calm tensions and reopen diplomatic channels. Russia and China have both criticized the attacks on Iran and called for immediate ceasefire and a return to negotiations. Both governments argue that military strikes risk destabilizing the entire region and violating international law. At the same time, despite their political support for Iran in international forums, neither country has shown signs of directly entering the conflict militarily. Instead, they are focused on diplomatic statements and discussions within international organizations such as the United Nations. In the Middle East, the reactions have been particularly complex because many countries fear of being directly drawn into the conflict. Gulf states such as Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, and Oman have expressed serious concern about escalation because their territories host important oil infrastructure and, in some cases, American military bases. These governments worry that retaliation by Iran could target their territory or disrupt shipping routes in the Persian Gulf. Other regional powers, including Turkey and Egypt, have also called for restraint and warned that a prolonged conflict could destabilize the entire region. Overall, the global reaction to the Iran war has been characterized by division, but also a shared concern about escalation. And while some countries support the United States and Israel, others condemn the attacks on Iran, and many governments are attempting to remain neutral while pushing for diplomacy. Either way, the dominant international priority has been preventing the conflict from expanding into a much larger regional or global war. The first 72 hours of this war transformed a surprising airstrike into a multi-country regional war, with missile exchanges across the Middle East and major global economic consequences. As in many modern conflicts, the civilian population quickly felt the effects of war. Airstrikes, missile attacks, and disruptions to infrastructure created risks and hardships for ordinary people, some who were supposed to be enjoying a vacation. In Iran, the opening strikes caused destruction in several areas, and human rights organizations reported that many civilians had been killed during the attacks on both military and government sites. Among the incidents that received international attention was a strike that reportedly hit a girls' school in the city of Minab, resulting in the deaths of many children. This incident led to strong criticism from several governments, and calls for an investigation into the circumstances of the attack. Civilians in Israel also faced danger from both missile and rocket attacks. Warning systems sounded frequently in some areas, and residents were required to take shelter during incoming strikes. Although Israel's air defense system had intercepted many projectiles, the constant threat created stress and fear among the population. People living near military bases or strategic infrastructure in other countries also experienced similar concerns. Communities close to United States bases or important ports feared that their locations could become targets if the fighting continued. The economic effect of the conflict added yet another layer of difficulty. Disruptions to shipping routes and energy production caused increases in global oil and gas prices. These changes have affected economies far beyond the Middle East and created uncertainty in international markets. For civilians across the region, the war has brought a combination of physical danger, economic pressure, and uncertainty about the future. In less than a week, the war has escalated into a cycle of strikes and counterstrikes. Israeli and US forces have targeted Iranian military infrastructure, while Iran has launched missile and drone attacks against Israeli and military installations throughout the region. Military analysts hold differing opinions on the strategic balance of the conflict. Some believe that the initial strikes have weakened critical components of Iran's military system, including its air defenses and facilities related to missile and nuclear programs. Others argue that Iran still has a significant missile arsenal and the ability to sustain retaliatory operations for an extended period. Political leaders have also provided varying estimates about how long the conflict might last. Israeli officials suggest that the war could continue for several weeks or months as they pursue their military objectives, while Iranian leaders have expressed their determination to resist for as long as necessary. Efforts in international diplomacy continue, with governments around the world trying to prevent further escalation. Many leaders are concerned that the conflict might worsen if additional countries become directly involved. the ultimate outcome of the war remains uncertain. The fighting has already resulted in significant loss of life, extensive damage to infrastructure, and disruptions in global markets, and the situation is evolving daily. The 2026 Iran war is currently one of the most significant conflicts of the decade, and its repercussions are expected to affect the Middle East and beyond for years to come. At this stage, we can only watch and speculate on the future implications of this conflict for the world as a whole. Thank you for watching today's video. If you found it informative, please leave a like or a comment down below. All of our content, from the research and script writing to the editing and narration, is completely human-driven, without the use of AI. So if you want to support our channel, consider subscribing and use the bell icon to get notifications on when the next Wars of the World video is released. Thank you for watching.